the April 15, 2021 meeting of the Radnor Township Zoning Hearing Board. We will begin with a pledge of allegiance. Please join me if you wish to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And thank you, Gus, as always, for providing the flag. Okay, we have a number of things to take care of before we hit the ground running. First, we have received correspondence from council for the applicant in Appeal 3088 that they have withdrawn that application. So if you are joining this evening for solely that matter, please be advised that that matter has been withdrawn. And I believe there is nothing else we need to do with that. Mr. Bergsman, you're not here for that, or are you? I'm sorry.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Okay.
Although we did that letter, you're correct. I was here for a continuance request from my partner on another matter.
Okay, we'll get to you shortly then. Thanks. Okay, so 3088 is off the docket as the appeal has been withdrawn. Moving next to Appeal 3075, the applicant Wayne Center LP, located at 316 East Lancaster Avenue, requests an extension of time for obtaining a permit under section 280-144 of the zoning code for an additional 6 months to November 2nd, 2021. Mr. Petroza, I believe you're here on behalf of the applicant in that matter.
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you. This, you may recall, this was a special exception to convert the former real estate office, Berkshire Hathaway real estate office, to a medical office for a plastic surgeon. Obviously, because of the change in use of the building, there's an extensive amount of fit out and redesign that needs to be done. And before that work can begin, there's a lot of design work that's taking place right now. There might even be a couple of approvals from the state because it's a medical office. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but they are working on the design actively right now. And we would respectfully request the additional 6 months extension.
John, you're on mute.
And that was the best work of my day. Are there any questions from the members of the board on this request?
No, not from John Lord.
Okay. All right, hearing none. And because Brad DeLizia is not with us this evening, for most of the matters, one of our alternate members will be a voting member this evening. And on one matter that we'll get to a bit later, both will vote. And we're just going to alternate back and forth. So Jamie, you're voting on this one. I would move that we grant the request for the 6 month extension. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any board discussion? Okay, hearing none, I will call the roll. Mr. John Lord.
Aye.
Jamie Foreman.
Aye.
Rich Weitzman.
Aye.
George Nagel.
Aye.
And I will approve as well. So that's 5-0. Good luck. I heard that the state might be involved, so good luck getting that in by November, but we will hopefully your client will just proceed with this matter. We won't see you again. Thank you, Mr. Petroza.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to appeal number 3077, the applicant Markier Properties LLC, the property located at Sproul Road and Highfield Road, requests an extension of time for obtaining a permit under section 280-144 of the zoning code for an additional 6 months to November 2nd, 2021. Mr. Cornelia, I believe you're here for the applicant.
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This, you may recall, this was granted back in November by the zoning hearing board. It was a corner lot. It was a vacant lot at the time. There was relief granted for front yard setback because it was consistent with the adjacent properties. There was some litigation on this property. It's very close to being resolved now. We're confident that it's going to be resolved very shortly. And actually, a grading permit application has already been made for with the township, and we're waiting approval of that grading permit application. So hopefully, we only need 6 months on this for the extension.
Okay, great. Are there any questions from members of the board for this request? Okay, I would move that we grant the extension requested by the applicant. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any board discussion? Okay, hearing none, I will call the roll on this question. Mr. John Lord,
Aye.
Mr. John Nagel,
Aye.
Mr. Rich Weitzman,
Aye.
Mr. George Nagel,
Aye.
and I will also approve. So that's 5-0, Norma. Thanks. Mr. Cornelia, thank you, and good luck with resolving things and getting going on that.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Likewise. We're going to, okay, here we are. Appeal 3085. This is the applicant Custom Finishers, the property located at 550 East Lancaster Avenue and zoned PB planned business. The applicant is requesting relief from section 280-123B of the code to permit the installation of one wall sign greater than 60 square feet and higher than 15 feet above existing grade. This application has been continued from the March meeting, and I now know, Mr. Brosman, you're here to speak to this question. What do you have for us this evening?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Riley, George Brosman. My partner, Rob Lewis, is handling this, and he submitted another request for a continuance, seeking to be continued to the June meeting of the zoning hearing board, and his letter granted an extension of time through June 30, 2021 to facilitate that request. This is being continued. As I understand it, the applicant is working with the Township Design Review Board on the sign, on the details, and they were before the Design Review Board and asked to consider changes. My understanding, they're on the Design Review Board agenda for May, and then the hope is to come to the zoning board in June. So we respectfully request continuance till the June hearing date.
Okay, are there any questions from the board on this request? Okay, hearing none, we'll call the vote. Mr. John Lord,
Aye.
Mr. Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie Foreman, sorry.
Aye.
Rich Weitzman,
Aye.
George, who's barking? Is that me barking?
Aye.
George Nagel, and
me
I
barking.
will also approve. So appeal 3085. It's been a long day. Appeal 3085 is continued to the June meeting. Thank you, Mr. Brosman.
Thank you. Good evening.
So
Okay. All right. We're gonna jump the order here for a second and consider next appeal number 3094. The applicant Matt Silverio, property located at 684 Conestoga Road and zoned R1 residential. The applicant is seeking relief, seeking a dimensional variance from section 280-15C in order to remove an existing brick patio and replace it with a composite deck with a pergola on a portion of the deck. Mr. Silverio, I see you have joined us. Good evening, and what do you have for us here?
Shall I swear him in?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. Mr. Silverio, Norma will swear you in.
If you'll raise your right hand, sir. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. State your full name for the record, please.
Matthew Silverio.
Thank you.
And I apologize in advance for the disturbance in the background. If you can hear crying, it's my son. So anyway, good evening and thank you all for your time. My wife and I are the owners at 684 Conestoga Road in Villanova. We are requesting a dimensional variance to remove a dilapidated brick patio and replace it with a new composite deck structure on virtually the same location. The current lot and orientation of the house are a little bit non-traditional. The front of my house faces a private drive that runs down from Conestoga Road. And the back of my house faces South Ithan, so sort of becomes two front yards. The size and the orientation of the lot was not traditional, and I think given different regulations at the time of construction, the patio was built outside of the present day setback from South Ithan Avenue. I provided a number of pictures, hopefully that demonstrates the location, closest to South Ithan functions as my backyard on this property, and was purposely designed this way by the builder with the patio in the back. We're facing a hardship here for several reasons. So one, due to the existing nature of the patio, it needs to be removed. It not only is unsightly, but provides a potential danger sort of due to the condition that it's in. I've tried to provide pictures to show that. Two, so our house is a Cape Cod style house, and therefore the master bedroom is on the first floor. As a result, probably one of the most obvious areas to build a deck within the current setback area is to place a deck on the northeast corner. However, that is right outside of our bedroom window. There are no points of ingress or egress on that side of the house. And the only way, therefore, to get to the deck would be to walk through our bedroom. The kitchen is on the south side of the house. So we either have to reorient the entire house to have the kitchen outside, or the only way to get through would be on the bedroom. Another area that falls within the currently allowable setback area is the paved driveway and shed. In addition to hardship to remove the driveway, we'd obviously need to have another driveway, most likely on the north side of the house. And then, you're sort of getting back in the same situation where prohibitive costs, and you would have a driveway sort of right up to your master bedroom, no points of ingress or egress there. There's also a smallish area, roughly 400 to 450 square feet, that's southwest of the current patio that does fall within the setback. I think the area, though, that area is not suitable due to a couple of factors. So one, there's an existing air conditioning unit up against the house. This would need to be removed, moved to another location, if a suitable one exists, and that would incur further costs. Building.
Mr. Silverio, I'm sorry, may I jump in for just 1 second? Ian, do you have the site plan that is included in the application that maybe you could share on the screen, so Mr. Silverio could point with a bit more specificity as to where a few of the items that he's discussing are located?
Yeah, I don't have this specific one. Would it be possible to get a digital copy emailed to me, and then I could screen share?
Sure. I don't know if it's allowed. I could also screen share, but I'm happy to.
You can also
yeah, I mean,
screen share, yes.
Yeah, that's fine if you can share it, Mr. Silverio.
Okay.
It's the copies in the application are rather small, and I want to make you'll have the ability to zoom presumably the site plan.
Can everybody see the site plan on my screen?
I can't.
No.
Okay, let me try that.
Yeah, this.
Oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. I don't know if someone needs to allow me that access.
Yeah, that might be Ian.
Try it again. You should be allowed to.
Okay.
Yep.
There we go. Okay, great.
All right, great. So
That's super. That's very helpful. Thank you.
okay. So the as I said, so here's the house. South Ithan, to orient you, South Ithan runs down here at the bottom of the screen, Conestoga Road up here to the upper right, the northeast quadrant. There's a private drive that runs down here. You can see Mac Drive there. Here is the current driveway. The patio, the existing brick patio, you can see underneath, and then the proposed is on top. So when I mentioned the northeast corner, where the master bedroom is, that would be right up in this area, right? So our master bedroom is essentially right there in the corner of the house. I also talked about the driveway that's over here. We have a shed, a driveway. In addition to that, right here off the edge of the house is a gas fireplace, which would, create some issues about building it there. I mentioned that there was a small area. It's basically right off the edge of the house, and then to the setback here, that could potentially be an area where we could build the deck. I think there's a couple of factors here. So I mentioned there is a existing air conditioner unit that is right here, right off the edge of the house that functions. It's a ductless split that functions for this extension here of the house that used to be the garage and is now a den. Also, there is a window right here. It's in my pictures, and building a deck there would cover that window. Because of the way the land slopes down, this part of the deck here at the back is actually much higher than this grass area here. You'd essentially be building the deck, and it'd be like knee high or waist high to the roof. This is a 1-floor piece here, where the rest of the house is 2 floors, which would create sort of a very awkward situation, and also I think a bit of a hazardous situation with kids being able to climb onto the roof. The last piece here is that this area that I'm pointing to now functions as a primary play area for my kids. So building there would be sort of less than ideal, given that there's like a lot of wooded area back here. Further, you wouldn't be able to have sight lines to the northeast property, which is all grass and another place that my kids play. I think, even with all these scenarios, you're left with the fact that the existing patio would need to be removed regardless. The way that the house was built, you'd essentially have stairs to nowhere from the back doors, one which is right here and the other which is right here, that would just have a stair down from the house, which is a bit of a safety risk for my kids and for my mother who's had double knee replacement surgeries and watches them a lot. I have also included in my packet a letter of support from the property at 682 Conestoga. That's right here, sort of north across the drive from me. Also, it was not included in my packet of support due to some administrative issues, but I also subsequently received a letter of support from Agnes Irwin's Chief Financial Officer, Tim Walsh. Agnes Irwin owns the property at both 400 South Ithan to the northwest of me, as well as to the sort of northeast to the southwest, 472 Conestoga Road. They own both of those properties, and it took a little bit of an administrative runaround to get the sign off, just because the person who lives there isn't the owner. But they fully supported the plans. I'd be happy to follow that up or share my screen. And then the other house that abuts my property, 408 South Ithan Road, is currently vacant. It was sold in the last spring and has no tenant. I'm not even entirely sure who owns it, so I was not able to get in contact with anyone there.
And Mr. Silverio, in connection with the construction of the deck, it's a fairly sizable deck. Are there stormwater improvements that are being made in conjunction with the proposed deck?
Yes, apologies for not mentioning that. You can see on the diagram here a proposed seepage bed that would be for stormwater runoff coming from all of the down pipes and in sort of regulation with what we received from the sort of township.
Okay. Are there any other questions from members of the board for the applicant?
Yeah, John Nagel, this is really just a small increase of an existing nonconformity, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
No,
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump in for Kevin, but I think the issue is, I mean, Kevin, if this were, say, if this were a patio at grade, the applicant would be able to proceed as of right?
Correct. The patios are not subject to setback requirements from from the building. I'm sorry, from the zoning code.
Right. So because the deck is actually affixed to the primary structure, it is viewed, it's treated as part of the structure for purposes of setbacks and whatnot.
That is correct.
Okay. And I think that may answer Mr. Nagel's question, but I could be wrong.
And the other question I had, I assume the parapet walls that are all around the existing patio are going away.
Yes, that is correct.
That's all I have.
Thanks. Any other board?
Yeah, John, I have a question. I guess it's either for Kevin or perhaps Gus. The stormwater management or retention program that's in these plans, should we grant approval of this variance, can the installation of those of that stormwater management be required as part of the approval?
I can take that, and then if Gus has got something other than that, because this is a project that will require earth disturbance, they will be required to submit a grading permit application, at which point meet all of the requirements of the grading ordinance, which will include some form of infiltration or stormwater management.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
And Ian, if we could go back to the full screen with the members, great, thanks. Any other questions from members of the board?
Hi, George Nagel. I just had what is the setback with the new deck? If you remind me.
So are you asking how far from the street would the deck be if the new deck was completed?
Yeah, so there's a 60-foot requirement, and what will your yard have?
I don't know the exact number. I can tell you that I believe that the space from the current end of the house to the edge of the brick wall is approximately at the most about 15 to 20 feet. And so, you just doing some quick subtraction, that would probably be, in the sort of, call it 25 to 35 foot range.
Yeah, I'm looking for the map again.
Yeah, Ian, I spoke too soon. Could you put that back up?
Absolutely. 1 second. There you are. Hopefully you can see.
Okay, so, all right, so I see the original property line or patio line there.
Yep.
And that looks like it did satisfy the 60-foot set off, except for maybe one little piece on the corner, on the right corner.
I believe that this line right here, that black line. So,
yeah,
so
I see.
Everything, see all this white, that's all outside of it. So the majority of it was out.
I see it. So it's probably not de minimis. It appears to be significant enough.
Yeah, the challenge here is because those dimensions are not marked on the plan. Typically, if the board were inclined to grant the relief is limited by what is entered into the record as being the dimension of the deck. So we can't tell on this plan how far out of the building envelope that deck is protruding.
Well, if I can suggest something, one of the drawings provided, I forget which exhibit it is, the corner that's all the way over to on the the right-hand side of the proposed porch, what do you want to call this thing? that juts out 14 feet according to
Yes,
what the,
I can share that if it's okay.
sure.
Okay, 1 second. Let me get that one up for you. All right, there we go.
Right, so it's 14 feet over here. And it pops out a little bit more when you get over to the left-hand side, probably another 5 feet or so. So it might be 19 feet at the other end and 14 feet on the right-hand side.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, and for purposes of identification, let's call the application itself A1 and call the drawing that is currently on the screen, which has been prepared by Keystone Custom Decks, as Exhibit A2. So what we would then need to do is, presuming that putting sort of 1 and 2 together. I'm sorry, the site plan itself, we're going to call A3. That's the site plan that was prepared by RKW Engineering Services. Doing some subtraction, if we're going to say that the we're assuming the maximum protrusion into or outside of the building envelope is then 19 feet at the presumably at the farthest point of that
Right,
octagon or nearly
Right, and
octagonal shape.
right. So that
Okay.
would be 19 feet from 60 feet gives you the approximate distance from because the building envelope, everything's outside the building envelope from my view.
Right. So we'll refer when we're looking at the limitation on where the deck can extend to. It will be the farthest point of that octagonal section from the building, which is plus or minus no more than 40 feet from the property line. 41 feet. I mean, do we want to be that exact?
I'd probably
Mr.
say
Chairman,
40
if I could
feet, probably
jump
about
in
right.
for a second on this matter, if the board.
Sure, Kevin, thank you.
We're inclined to grant relief in terms of how administration, we would verify compliance. We would look at the site plan that would be obviously the exhibit included as part of this, and then overlay that with the site plan submitted as part of the grading permit application, and that with the building plans to confirm that what was submitted as part of this application is consistent with what was submitted later, should they be successful.
Okay, so if we do grant relief, we will make specific reference to the site plan and the Keystone custom deck drawings, which are A3 and A2 respectively. And then there'll be that ability to double check that the plans submitted to the township for construction comply with that. Okay, great. Are there any other questions from members of the board? Kevin, I now have to check my email. I have to look to see whether there's public comment on this matter.
John, while you're looking, can I ask a question? It's Rich Weitzman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rich. Sure, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No problem. Do we know what the existing, how far into it the setback the existing deck encroaches?
So I don't know exactly. What I can say is that from the site plan, the very tip of the current brick wall is at, and I apologize, you can't see that. So let me double back here, share this other screen. The sort of furthest point of the existing brick wall is basically, and I know it's not entirely 100% accurate, but basically the same as the edge of that octagon. So presumably those would be roughly the same. Therefore, it sort of is about, again, 40 feet or so from South Iton.
Okay, so the existing brick deck matches up with the furthest point.
Yeah,
That-
it's a
that
little
John-
bit of a weird shape because one comes out here and the other comes out there, but at the end of the day, they're only really coming as far as to the same furthest point, just in a different spot.
Okay, and would you mind showing me the building envelope? I think I see it now, but
So sure, you can see my cursor.
yeah,
So it's down here, then there, back down here, down.
Referring to the solid line out here.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
See the
It's-
outer-
it- but
the outer
there's the
red
bull.
solid black line, that's the building envelope.
that goes around the outside. Yeah, I see
The
it.
R1
Okay.
zoning.
Yeah. Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Kevin, I did not see any emails.
Mr. Chairman, we have a few months back, we changed things up. Emails should not be coming
Oh,
in. There was a link
That's right,
for
that's right.
the
I'm
public to
sorry.
register and participate. I note that we have 4 attendees that would be participating. I don't know if Ian can see if anybody has their hand up.
I'm not seeing any hands raised. We do have 4 members from the public. But I'm not seeing any hands raised for this matter.
Okay, great. And thanks for that reminder, Kevin. I had forgotten that. Okay, Mr. Silverio, would you like to move the exhibits that you've offered into the record?
I move to enter the exhibits into the record.
Without objection? I will move that we grant the variance that is requested by the applicant for relief from section 280. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. From 280-15C in order to construct a deck in accordance with the plans and the testimony that's been presented here this evening. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any board discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the vote. Mr. John Lord,
Aye.
Mr. John Nagel,
Aye.
Mr. Rich Weitzman,
Aye.
Mr. George Nagel,
Aye.
and I will approve as well. That's 5-0. Mr. Silverio, nice presentation there. Good luck with your project, and thanks for participating.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great evening.
You too.
Okay, all right, bear with me because I have some administrative things to do here on this one. Okay, we will call the next case, which is Appeal 3093. The applicant, C.G. Wayne LLC, the property located at Eagle Road and Radnor Street Road and zoned P1 planned institutional. The applicant is requesting a variance from section 280-112 to permit, it says to permit and such other relief as deemed necessary by the board. The applicant is proposing a residential development on the subject property. I've got a couple matters before we get into the substantive portion of this proceeding. First, this is the case in which Mr. George Nagel has indicated that he will be recusing himself. So on this matter, both of our alternate members, Jamie Foreman and John Nagel, will be voting in the board's consideration of the matter. Next, we are advised that we have received a request for party status from Mr. Harry Mahoney, and I'm sorry, I'm looking for a piece of paper. Bear with me for a second. Is Mr. Mahoney with us?
There he is.
Hi, good evening. Do we swear a party looking for party status, someone looking for party status? I'm not sure that we do. Do we, guys?
Yes, yeah, they're going to provide testimony. with respect to their.
Okay, all right. Norma, if you would swear Mr. Mahoney, please.
Yeah, can we get his picture?
Yeah, one moment. I'm just gonna let him rejoin as a panelist. It'll take 1 second.
Okay, thanks.
And obviously, a preliminary matter may be to see whether or not the applicant objects to Mr. Mahoney having party status.
Well, Mr. Falcone, good evening. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm not going to presume that you will make spurious objections to party
No.
status. So maybe you want to hear what Mr. Mahoney has to say and then make your decision, or will
Yes,
you
sir.
just? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, can you see me?
No. Would you like me just to swear him anyway?
I can't seem to get on
Let's-
the video.
Mr. Mahoney, you should be able to see a start video icon at the bottom left of your screen.
Yes, I've hit that several times and it does not work.
Falcone, do you have any problem with him being sworn in without the video?
No, I recognize the voice. So I believe it's Hank.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
Sure thing.
Norma, if you would.
Mr. Mahoney, you do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your full name for the record, please.
It's Harry G. People call me Hank Mahoney, M-A-H-O-N-E-Y.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. You've requested party status. Could you describe to the board the basis for this request?
Certainly. I live at 200 East Beach Street Lane, which is in North Wayne in the first ward. I'm approximately 2 blocks from the subject property. And I believe that whatever happens here tonight will have a direct and immediate pecuniary effect on my property because it will potentially allow for the project to go forward. That means 20 more houses in North Wayne, right down the street from me, which I think may impact upon the property value. Also, there's going to be a connection to the East Beach Street Lane Road across Radnor Street Road, and that potentially could cause dramatic increase in traffic on East Beach Street Lane, which is where my house is located. So I believe under all those circumstances, I should be granted party status.
And Mr. Mahoney, did you receive a notice of this evening's hearing?
I didn't receive it directly, but I received it from one of my neighbor friends.
Okay. Mr. Falcone, any questions?
Mr. Mahoney, did you not receive a notice because you are outside of the required notice area? Are you beyond that distance from the subject property?
I do not know the reason why I did not receive it. I made my interest in the project very well known to everybody.
Understood. Do you believe that your interest is specific and unique to your property, or is it a community interest?
It's specific and unique to my property.
I guess, Mr. Riley, I would like to know how far from the property Mr. Mahoney is actually located to distinguish whether or not the impact on his property that he is suggesting is in fact unique to Mr. Mahoney rather than a community impact. As we know, simply creating additional traffic in an area doesn't give somebody outside of an appropriate distance to the property standing just because they happen to live generally near the property. So while we do appreciate Mr. Mahoney's interest, I think it would be helpful for the record to know exactly how far he is from the site.
Well, I'm not sure we have a cartographer handy. So
is there a way to show a map or anything?
Yeah, well, let me ask Mr. Falcone, let me ask this question before we go in that direction. Was Mr. Mahoney's address included on the list of addresses to which the applicant was required to send notice?
You know, I don't know, John. And again, I don't think in theory we object to Hank being a party. I'm more interested to know kind of how that, whether it's a direct impact to Hank or whether he's speaking generally on behalf of the community. And I think the location helps with that, but you know, we don't in theory object to Hank being a party.
I'm exactly 2 blocks away from the property site that's in question here tonight. You go down Beech Tree Lane to Woodland Avenue, right there on the corner. I can see the property when I walk out in the morning. I can look up the street, I can see it. So I think it's sufficiently close that I would have an interest in the outcome of this proceeding.
Okay, I think we can proceed, Mr. Riley, with
Okay.
Mr. Mahoney being accepted as a party if it suits the board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Falcone. Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. With that as background, the board will make the determination whether to grant party status. I'll just call the roll. Mr. Lord,
I'm not opposed.
Mr. Weitzman,
I'm not sure how to answer. I guess I would permit it.
Mr. John Nagel,
John, I'm not sure this is a board decision.
actually,
I would ask Gus.
prior to this meeting, I checked with Gus. Mr. John Nagel, you were on mute there. If
Yeah,
you could.
it's fine with me.
Okay, Jamie Foreman,
I'm fine with it. Thank you.
and I have no objection as well. So Mr. Mahoney will be included as a party to the proceeding.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that as background, Mr. Falcone, what do you have for us?
Thank you. We appreciate it. As you had initially announced, we are here on behalf of C.G. Wayne LLC. They're the equitable owner of the property. That's the subject of the application tonight. Eastern University is the owner, and we have the property under agreement to purchase. The applicant is seeking to redevelop the site, which is presently 14 homes and a parking lot and zoned PI. The applicant is seeking to redevelop the site with 20 homes and to pursue a map change to a residential zoning district. We have been before the Township's Planning Commission with respect to this application, meaning the application before the Zoning Hearing Board. And the Planning Commission has offered a recommendation of approval. We've included that in our package of exhibits. But we've also been in front of the County Planning Commission, the Township Planning Commission, and the Shade Tree as part of the project to develop the property with the proposed 20 homes. All of those boards have also recommended approval of that land development process. For clarity, though, we are here only for purposes of the zoning relief we're seeking tonight, and that's to disturb areas of steep slopes on the site. And it became apparent during the Planning Commission meeting as part of our preliminary land development process that there were slopes on the site that, although man-made, we recognize the township does not absolve man-made slopes from the requirement to comply, that those slopes were in fact steep and that we would be disturbing those as part of the development. We were told to come to you folks to get relief before that project moved any further down the line. And so the relief we're seeking tonight really is a threshold issue for this project to move forward, but it is not determinative of whether or not the project itself, as we've proposed, will be successful. The project still needs to move forward. We've gotten only the recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, and we are awaiting the outcome of this meeting before we move to them for our first meeting with respect to preliminary land development. The hearing itself for the map change hasn't been advertised, and that too would follow the decision of this board. The actual conditions on the site are what bring us here today. The slopes, as you'll see later in testimony from Mr. Lambert, are a result of development of the site that happened many decades ago, well before the township had an ordinance in place that required permitting before disturbance of slopes. These slopes date back to the 40s and the 50s in that general area when the property was developed with some homes, which exist there today. There are 14 homes, as I had mentioned, and then ultimately with a parking lot. And none of those projects were required to be permitted because they predated that requirement. And as a result, they also predate the language of the ordinance in section 281.12, which would say, if you developed slopes on your site in accordance with section 175, you don't need relief. As was discussed in front of the Planning Commission a few weeks ago, the actual slopes on our site do in fact comply with section 175 of the code. The issue here is that they predated that section when they were made, so there was no need to permit. If the development of the site were to have occurred today, or even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would not be in front of this board. We would have a situation where the slopes were in fact created as part of a 175-11, and they would be excluded from the need to seek relief. And part of that is what drives the hardship in this case, as well as some of the concern we have over the way in which the ordinance is structured. There is no provision to account for slopes that may have been man-made, but predated the section of the ordinance that would have otherwise been complied with. And that in and of itself has now created a situation where slopes bisect the property and preclude any comprehensive redevelopment of any kind, whether it's under PI or residential, R1 or R2. And so in order for this property to be redeveloped, there will have to be an encroachment into the slopes. And when we look more closely at the ordinance itself, section 281.12, there is a specific intent set forth in that section. And it reads in relevant part that the intent is to control the development of land in areas containing steeply sloped land, and for the following purpose: to limit erosion, to protect watersheds and limit increases in stormwater runoff, to prevent an increase in possibilities of landslides, to maintain adequate foliage on hillsides, and to protect streams from increases in sediment. We, as part of this application, are specifically meeting that intent. One of the things that folks that have followed along in this process will know is that the project over many, many months was designed to keep disturbance of the existing wooded areas on the site intact. And as part of our discussions with the township shade tree, they've recognized the efforts made by this applicant and are very pleased with the proposed application and the way that it handles those hillsides and the existing woodlands that are on the site. In addition, the current site is unmitigated with respect to stormwater. So the proposed application proposes to reduce the overall impervious coverage on the site and then to exceed the township's requirements with respect to stormwater. So the very issues that section 281.12 speaks to, this applicant is going to meet. And again, because of the timing of the slopes that were created on this site, they are uncontrolled, and they contribute to an already serious runoff problem in the township with respect to stormwater. And that's not to be overlooked insofar as time's gone on and we've become more aware of the dangers of development. The appropriate way to address that is to move along with those standards and then to better properties as you move through. Because of the timing of these slopes, there's no opportunity to do that. If the property were left in its current condition and the township were to take the position that those slopes can never be disturbed because they were created prior to the ordinance requiring permitting, then the conditions there cannot be bettered. Stormwater cannot move forward as far as control goes. The existing wooded conditions on the property would be severely impacted to the extent people wanted to piecemeal and try and squeeze in smaller type and less comprehensive development on the site. It's simply not consistent with where the township and its comprehensive plan want to see development move on sites like this. And with respect to the comprehensive plan, it should be noted that Radnor's comprehensive plan suggests and directs that where PI property is taken offline, that it should be moved back to residential. And again, without relief from this board, and whether it be as part of this project or another project, if it's R1, if it's R2, if it's R1A, appropriate residential development on this site will need slope relief. It's just the nature of the location of the slopes and the way in which they were designed. So what I'd like to do, if there are no questions for me, is just summarize the exhibits that we have pre-marked and then get to my first witness, who would be Rob Lambert. So if the board doesn't have questions for me, I can identify those exhibits and then turn to Rob, who will start a screen share, and then we can get into testimony that way.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank you. So we've marked 9 exhibits, and A1 is a copy of our application. A2 is a deed and authorization letter from Eastern University to allow us to be here. A3 is an existing steep slopes plan. A4 is a proposed grading and dimensions plan. A5 are a series of site photographs which show the existing slopes as they sit today. A6 is a series of historical aerial photographs dating back to 1958. A7 is a series of USGS maps showing the site dating back to 1894. A8 is the Planning Commission's review and recommendation to this board. And A9 is a copy of Rob Lambert's CV. I'll be asking to have Mr. Lambert admitted as an expert. I know he's been admitted many times before this board, but that is a copy of his qualifications should the board or Mr. Mahoney wish to voir dire Mr. Lambert.
Okay, I'm not sure that I've got the full exhibit set that you've just described, Mr. Falcone. I have much of that package, but perhaps not all of it. Specifically, okay, there's Mr. Lambert's CV. All right, that was the piece that was missing, and I don't know that Mr. Mahoney has it either, but okay, if you're calling Mr. Lambert, why don't you call him, and then we'll get to the issue of expert status. Go ahead.
I appreciate it. Rob, can you?
Oh, wait, I have to swear him in.
Yep, I was
Sorry,
just gonna
that's
ask him to turn his mic on and get ready for you.
And actually, if you could take the CV down for a moment so Norma can see. Thank you.
There we are. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you so much, and state your full name, please.
Robert M. Lambert.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Rob, could you please spell your name for the record?
Sure. It's Lambert, Lambert.
And by whom are you employed?
Site Engineering Concepts.
And what's your position with site engineering?
I'm a principal there.
We've marked as exhibit A9, if you've got that up on the screen there, a copy of your CV. Is that an accurate representation of your professional and educational background?
Yes, it is.
And have you been accepted as an expert in civil engineering in Radnor Township before and elsewhere in the Commonwealth?
Many times.
And in front of this board?
Many times.
So, Mr. Riley, I would like to ask that Mr. Lambert be admitted as an expert in civil engineering as he has in the past, but would obviously offer him up for voir dire by the board or Mr. Mahoney.
I have no
You're
questions
muted.
for the witness. Can you hear me?
Hank, I can hear you. I think John is muted.
Well, I have no questions for the witness.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we'll accept Mr. Lambert as an expert without objection.
Thank you very much. Rob, has your firm been engaged as the engineer for this project?
Yes, we have.
And you've been chiefly assigned to the project, is that correct?
That is correct.
And as a result, you've visited the project on numerous occasions, is that correct?
Many times before being engaged and many times after being engaged.
So I think during your testimony, let's first pull up A3 if you can. So you've studied the conditions of the property as they exist today, is that right?
Yes, Exhibit A3 is shown on the screen. This shows the existing topography, the physical features, the parking lot, the houses. It also identifies some locations of some former buildings that were on the property. To orient you to this page, we have Eagle Road on the left-hand side going kind of top to bottom at a little bit of an angle, Radnor Street Road across the bottom of the page, and Walnut Avenue going from top to bottom on the right-hand side of the page. You can see in the big kind of center area, a bunch of little stripes, and that's actually a large asphalt parking lot, which is accessed off of Radnor Street Road. And that is a parking lot that we'll be talking about. The various colors on this page, we've highlighted different slopes. And so kind of the pink along both sides of the parking lot and through other areas are man-made slopes that we propose to remove. The teal color are man-made slopes that we're not touching, and the purple color are slopes that we weren't quite sure if they were man-made or not, so we've shown them as just being over 20% slopes.
And you did physical and personal inspections at this site, is that correct?
Yes, we've walked the property innumerable times.
And the exhibit that you have here marked as A3, you've colored the slopes, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you've also taken photographs yourself. You've taken photographs of the site and some of these sloped areas. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we've marked those pictures as Exhibit A5. Can you turn to A5?
Exhibit A5A. And I'm going to go back and forth between A5 and A3. So if it gets to be confusing, just please let me know. So you can see, oops, sorry. On this plan, you can see kind of asphalt here on the lower left-hand side of the photograph. I apologize, my mouse is doing odd things. On the lower left side of the photograph, you can see some asphalt. And obviously there's a lot of debris and leaves. And then the right side, you can see where the ground raises up rather abruptly there. And that is some of the steep slope. I'm going to go back to A3. The area that photograph is taken is on A3. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a gray box shown, and that was a former building, and we'll see that in the aerial photographs later, that was in that location previously. And then they constructed a turnaround when they removed that building, it looks like, and that asphalt is still there. So some of the slopes are up in that area around that turnaround. I'm going to go back to A5. This is A5B, again, just showing the area up in that plateau where that building was. So A5C, this is an area of steep slopes, and you can clearly see there's a set of steps coming down. You have the steep slope, a curb, and the pavement. So going back to A3, that area of steep slope is in the lower left-hand corner of the property, you can see the pink areas along the existing road, and you can see where the set of steps is. And so you can see clearly where that area was cut in. Going to A5D. So this is the parking lot I referenced in the initial discussion about the A3. And here you can see a set of steps coming down. You can see where the parking lot was cut into the existing grade. And then you have the asphalt parking lot to the right. I'm going to flip through a few of these and then I'll go back to A3 to show you where they're taken. So A5E, this is again, so Radnor Street Road is off to the left. You can see the stop sign in the left-hand side of the image. And then you can see the slope that goes around the parking lot. So you can see that this end was really pushed into the grade at this very end of the parking lot. Going to A5F, this is one of the existing dwellings. And again, you can see where the dwelling was constructed. Just downhill of the dwelling, they filled the grade when they built the house. A5G, again, you can see where they have grade along the front of the house. You have a walkout situation on the right-hand side of the existing dwelling. And then A5H, it's a little bit hard to see with the debris here and the kind of the understory. But as you look around the left side of the image, that is all a steep slope. And so I'm going to go back to A3 to walk you around where I took those photographs. The first photograph that I showed you, if you remember the set of stairs, was standing with my back facing Radnor Street Road and looking down what I'll refer to as the left, but it's the north side of the parking lot. So the left side of the parking lot. In that photograph, you could see where the grade was higher on the left-hand side, so uphill, and then the grade was cut in to where the parking lot is. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of this parking lot, that is actually a fill slope. And so it made sense when they built this parking lot that they simply cut from the uphill side and pushed to the downhill side. Because if you look at the little dashed lines as you go across the parking lot, those are the contour lines. And all around the property, you can see these dashed lines that are the contour lines. This is a very artificial placement of those contours. And really, you can just see where they flattened out the parking lot, graded it out, cut all along the uphill side, filled along the low hill on the downhill side to build that. The other photograph I showed of the parking lot was standing in the bottom right-hand corner, looking toward the north. And so Radnor Street Road was on my left. You could see the stop sign. And that was the same set of stairs that we mentioned. When we started looking at the house photographs, the first house photograph, I believe actually was the house right in the corner of the parking lot. And you could see the slope kind of around and behind the house. The second one was a steep slope just adjacent to the front of the house that's in the upper left-hand corner of the parking lot. And again, you can just see where it was just filled right at the top. They cut behind the house and they filled in front of the house to create a pad to build it. The same thing happened to the house, kind of the next house down toward Radnor Street Road. Again, we saw the front where they graded out in front of the house, and in the back where I said that the debris, you can really see it with the understory, is the grades around the back were cut into the slope uphill. And so you can see that pattern around the property where the property had a roughly 10% slope naturally, and then all these physical improvements were constructed, which modified the slopes to create the steep slopes.
And Rob, so you obviously had a site inspection and a site visit to determine the nature of these slopes. And in doing so, is it your opinion that they are naturally occurring, or again, are they part of some type of a development?
They were clearly part of the development and built as part of improvements on the site, whether it was a building or a parking lot or paving. It was simply areas that they were trying to flatten in kind of in the shortest distance.
And I mean, how do you make that determination? There's obviously an engineering component to it where you can look at the way you had mentioned that they're cut and filled, correct? But is there other data that you can consider to determine whether or not these slopes, or I should say how they were created?
Yeah, so we had the visual components that we just talked about. We briefly talked about the contours and how contours would naturally occur. They wouldn't come and plateau across a parking lot and then continue on the other side. It would just naturally come across. And one of the things we did is looked at USGS maps that show contours over time. They're very kind of large scale, but it starts to show you what a property would have looked like over time.
And we've marked those USGS maps that you've considered, correct? We've marked them as Exhibit A7?
Correct. That's Exhibit A7.
Can you pull those up and just kind of walk the board through what they're looking at? I mean, I certainly have no idea, but perhaps you can explain exactly what we're seeing here and why that's relevant to this development.
Absolutely. So I pulled up Exhibit A7A, which is an 1894 USGS map. On this map, going from the upper left down at an angle to about the middle of the bottom of the image is Radnor Street Road. Going left to right from one side to the other, and there's a little bit of a jog in the middle where it crosses Radnor Street. That would be Eagle Road. Walnut, you can see kind of toward the bottom, and then you see a street that actually doesn't exist that crosses a blue line, and that blue line represents what the stream through the property. The kind of orange lines are contour lines. And so this is showing what the topography of the earth looked like back then. And then the black dots or black squares that you can see are structures that they add over time. And so you'll see in a series of these images, more and more black dots over time. And that's really showing the structure. So you can see the contours. It's a very kind of even contour. It looks like in 1894, there was some type of swale through the center of the property from the end of where Beech Tree is on Radnor Street Road and hits the middle of the property, but it looks like there was a swale of some sort at that time. So A7B is a 1952 image. You can see there's a little bit more detail to it now. From the kind of the middle of the left to the middle of the bottom is again Radnor Street Road. The solid white with the red is Eagle Road, going from left to right. Just to again orient everyone. Notice the road is no longer shown. That was the paper street or the road that was never constructed, and the blue line is the stream. Again, just trying to orient you with the images. You can see actually the two structures that I said were removed shown on this image. So you have the first building and then a second smaller building. If you look at the previous, I'm going to flip back to A7A real quickly. You can see where the contours were very evenly spaced. A7B, when you start to get to A7B around the structures, the contours start to get a little bit closer. And so they just changed it looks like they changed some of the topography when they built those structures. The next one is the 1966 image. Again, you see the same orientation, Radnor Street Road, angled, and then Eagle Road going left to right. All the black dots are more additional structures. So you can see in 1966, a lot of the houses along Radnor Street Road were constructed. The large structure at the top of the hill was in place, and there's some of the other smaller houses were constructed at that time. If you start looking at the contours by 1966, it looks like where that swale was is actually starting to flatten out on these contours. And so I'm not sure exactly if that parking lot was built at that time, but it suggests that they were starting to modify the grades in that area. The 1992 aerial is A7D. Again, same orientation of the image. You can see more of the black dots. These are all the houses now that you see today are constructed as part of this 1992 plan. Again, the contours very similar to the I believe it was 1966, the A7C plan. And then A7E, this is just the 2010. It has an aerial photograph with it, but it also has the contours on top of it. So you got rid of the black dots, but you can see the contours. So you start to see the relationship of the parking lot that we referenced and the contour lines. And so you can see that it's a little bit offset from where Beech Tree is toward Walnut. And so you can start to see where those contours were flattened in that area. And if you go back to that 66 plan, you can see really where they were flattened. And so that's putting that in about the same location as that, as the parking lot.
And Rob, you also have done an analysis of aerial photographs of this site and historical data. Can you pull those up? I think we have those marked as A6.
Correct. So A6A is a 1958 aerial. This one's a little bit harder to see the roads, but it's the same orientation as the USGS plans. And so from the upper left, kind of to the lower right, through about the center of the page is Radnor Street Road. And from the left side, and it kind of a little bit goes around because we all know Eagle Road's not straight, especially in this area, is Eagle Road. So right dead center is the subject property. So you can see the parking lot does not exist in 1958, but you can see, if you look very closely, and I'll actually zoom in here, you can see the existing structures sitting at the top of the hill, and you can start to see the houses going up along Radnor Street Road. A6B is a 1965 aerial. Again, same orientation. You can see, again, the same structures that we saw in the previous photograph, but the big difference is the parking lot. So you can see sometime before 1965, that parking lot was constructed there. And then if we go to A6C, which is the 1971, so between A6B and A6C, you can start to see the houses that were actually built on the downhill side of the parking lot. So you can see them wrapping the downhill side of the parking lot. You can see the houses that were there in 1958. Obviously, the structures at the top of the hill. Oops, sorry. A6D. Again, this was an aerial photograph just using Google Earth. It was 1992 aerial. You can see the two structures. If you looking at A3, the two gray boxes we show on the plan are representative of these two structures. The larger of the two was removed in 1999. And you can see in A6E, which was a 2002, that the area of the building there, it was all disturbed as part of that construction.
And using kind of the collective of this data, Rob, when you look at all of it, and this kind of brings us to the point here, the condition of the property, are you able to make an educated determination as to whether the site itself would in fact contain steep slopes today, but for the prior development?
I think there's some small areas along the stream that would have created that would have had steep slopes just right there. I believe that the majority of the site, which we see today, would not have any steep slopes under the township definition if it was not for the development. And so we had this development really in the 1950s and 60s changed the topography of the site.
And you're familiar with the township's code with respect to slope controls. And as it reads, is it your belief, is it your opinion that the township's code is in place to protect natural slopes where they exist.
Correct. And I think that the code acknowledges that by by exempting steep slopes that were made in conformance. I believe that it's 170, chapter 175.
That's correct. And you've studied the slopes on this property. And do those slopes in fact conform with section 175 as you've inspected them?
Yes.
And is it your belief then that if these slopes were created when the ordinance itself existed, we would in fact be exempted from the requirements to seek relief tonight?
That is correct. Yes.
And that's a position that you've expressed and we've expressed to the township. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And it is the township's position. You've submitted an application to Mr. Kachansky's office about these slopes. And it is the township's position, is it not, that slopes that are created in conformity with section 175 are generally permitted?
Correct. They would like to see a permit plan showing the creation of those slopes.
And these slopes, when they were created, predated the requirement to seek a permit and to obtain a permit. Is that correct?
Correct. There were no grading permits. I did review the township files. I probably wouldn't have a job back then, but the house, the house permit plans that were in there were very simplistic plans, and it had a house and a number, and it was maybe a one sheet plan saying this is what we were going to build. There was no location to it. It just said this is what we were going to build, and that was what was in the file.
And are any of the improvements located on the site today mitigated with respect to stormwater? Are there any stormwater controls out there today?
No, this large parking lot and all of the structures do not have any stormwater controls whatsoever.
And that's a result of the time in which these were created. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And just, I had mentioned in my opening, I'd like to get you on the record also confirming that the proposed development for this site, although we're not here for the overall development, I think it's foolish to suggest we can't consider it, will reduce the overall amount of impervious coverage on the site. Is that correct?
Correct. The proposed plan has less impervious than exists today.
And the intent is to meet and then exceed the township's stormwater requirements with respect to the development. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So let's turn to Exhibit A4. And this is our proposed development of the site. Is that correct?
That is correct. Exhibit A4.
And can you walk the board through, I guess, and orient them as to the location of the sloped areas and how this project or any really comprehensive redevelopment of the site in a residential fashion disturbs those slopes?
Okay, I'd like to, I'll flip back and forth again between A3 and A4 just to start showing the comparison. I do not have an overlay of both of them. So again, both are in the same orientation. Radnor Street Road is left to right on the bottom of the page. Eagle Road, top to bottom on the left, Walnut, top to bottom on the right. What this plan shows is the contemplation of an extension of Beech Tree into a cul-de-sac. The whole purpose of this plan, really kind of driving this plan, were two things. One was fitting into the neighborhood that's just to the bottom of this page and extending the same grid pattern that exists today. So it was the extension of Beech Tree. The other very important piece of this plan was along Eagle Road, and you can see it in this plan with the green areas, includes, the main areas of trees on this property are all along Eagle Road, the mature trees. And so this plan was specifically designed to keep away from those trees and preserve those trees on that hill. And so you can see that the houses around the cul-de-sac, there are three houses that are accessed off of the cul-de-sac, but actually front on Eagle Road. And then there are 5 houses that front on Walnut, along with 2 on Radnor Street Road, but it was really a contemplation of trying to preserve the tree canopy, preserve all the area around the existing stream, and really create a comprehensive stormwater plan for the property. Is we actually have 17 stormwater basins throughout this entire property. And so part of the modeling of the property is we actually discount some of the impervious that actually exists, but we are also adding all the basins to control runoff from all of the proposed houses. So going, it's more specifically to the steep slope question, and I wanted to highlight the trees because that's actually part of the purpose of the steep slope ordinance. But if I go back to A3, so I'm going to orient you with beech tree because that's a common factor here. So beech tree, you can see the end of it in about the middle of the page along Radnor Street Road. And so if you can imagine this, up to the upper right, you can see the band of man-made slopes along the parking lot that really bisects the property. It almost divides the entire property in two. And then you can see the other areas that would be kind of at the upper end of that. So if I go back to A4, again, Beech Tree Road at the bottom, if you can imagine the slopes actually coming straight up through the property. And so it would actually go right through the road and the driveway that exists or is proposed, is where the first band of steep slopes. The second band of steep slope falls in between the houses that faced Walnut and the houses on the new cul-de-sac, with some scattered steep slopes around the existing dwellings, around really, it's probably lots 11 and 12 as shown on A4.
And we talked about I mentioned in the beginning that any comprehensive redevelopment of this site under any zoning code would require some disturbance of steep slopes. Is that your opinion as well?
Yes, if you look at a comprehensive development of this, and you know, it's almost a square, right? If you look at this plan on A3, and this line of pink, again, it bisects that property. And so if you had a comprehensive development of this, you're really going to want to get from one side of the property closer to Walnut to the other side of the property, which is closer to Eagle. So you're going to have to cross this area of slopes. The other thing is even in the removal of one of these dwellings and or removal of the parking lot, is there would be most likely grading associated with that. You know, if you were to build nothing and just remove the improvement, there's going to be grading that's associated with it that's just more than likely going to flatten or, you know, just eliminate the steep slopes. It's going to smooth out the areas to put it back more toward a natural condition. And again, if you again look at the contours, the dashed lines, is they all kind of continue off at an angle, and you would naturally redo that. So you wouldn't be concentrating, you know, water through the area where you'd remove the asphalt. So even in just simple removals, you may be removing some of the steep slopes.
And so you beat me to my next point, but I think it's an important one. You know, even in getting, is it your opinion that even in just simply getting the property into a position where you can better control stormwater, which is to remove some of these existing impervious coverage areas, you'll be disturbing slopes to get it to a more natural, controllable condition?
That is correct.
And you're familiar with the township's slope control ordinance, is that correct?
I am, yes.
And you've mentioned the intent of that ordinance. I also did. And does the property in its present condition, in your opinion, satisfy that intent?
It does not. You know, there are no stormwater controls. There's areas of, you know, very steep slopes that we saw along some of those houses. It does not, you know, control any of the streams. And I pulled up on the screen is the purpose of 28112, right? To limit erosion and sedimentation. You can see areas in the first two photographs there, where it's really unkept areas. They're overgrown. There's areas of erosion there that when I walked the site, I could see. There's, protect watersheds and limit increases in stormwater runoff, right? There's no stormwater controls for all the impervious there. Our project actually proposes to control stormwater, add 17 basins to the site, but we're not adding any impervious. So there's going to be dramatic increases or improvements in the control of stormwater. To prevent an increase in the possibilities of landslide and soil subsidence. Again, I believe the proposed plan achieves this. I wouldn't say that the existing really has any impact to that. It's all there. There are some areas that might slough away a little bit, but I wouldn't call it a landslide. 4, to maintain adequate foliage over and cover over hillsides. I think that's one of the main factors of what this development plan did was, and I believe the Shade Tree Commission in their review, we went to that meeting, actually complimented the applicant for taking that into consideration, really preserving the tree canopy along Eagle Road. And this whole plan was driven by that tree canopy. So I believe that this plan would achieve it. And then 5 was to protect streams from increasing sediment and pollution. Again, we have all these uncontrolled conditions. We're going to control them and be able to discharge it. So I believe that our proposed plan does a much better job than the existing condition.
And Rob, when you designed this site, were you mindful of the slopes in that design? Did you consider the impact and ways to design it, areas to avoid and so forth?
Yes, we really tried to avoid some of the real steep areas that are shown in the pink area. Again, that's a wooded area, so we were trying to avoid it. And I guess it's a lavender, I guess we could call it. Up by the stream, we're trying to, keep the areas away from the stream and really come up with a plan that would obviously preserve the trees, provide the stormwater, and develop it in a comprehensive way.
And you're aware that you've been in front of this board a number of times, but they are required to consider certain criteria when contemplating the issuance of a variance. You're aware of that, correct?
Yes.
And have you refreshed yourself in your recollection on what those criteria are?
Yes.
And probably the most controlling criteria there is a hardship present? Is there a unique physical circumstance or condition peculiar to this property that creates a hardship? What's your opinion on that?
I believe this is definitely a hardship. You have slopes that were created in conformance with Chapter 175, which would be exempted, but they were built before 175, and so now they're not exempt. They were, man-made features that created these slopes, and the slopes are built, especially the one along the parking lot, built in a manner that it bisects the property, right? And so you have man-made slopes that now bisect and really limit what you can do with the property.
And again, it's your opinion based on your study that at one point, the areas that are steeply sloped today were not steeply sloped. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
And so kind of using the same logic you came to when considering the hardship, could any comprehensive redevelopment of this site happen in strict conformity with the provisions of the code?
No, I believe relief would be needed for a comprehensive development of the site.
And the applicant did not create these conditions, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the essential character of the neighborhood. I know, neighbors are interested in the ultimate redevelopment of this site, and we as a development team are mindful that there's still work that needs to be done there in that neighborhood outreach. But as part of the essential character and where this application is going and whether the disturbance of these slopes will alter the essential character of the neighborhood, do you have an opinion on that?
No, I actually think it enhances the character of the neighborhood. in, a lot of the research that the team has done is the architectural side of the team did a lot of research and actually found that a lot of the houses in that North Wayne neighborhood were all part of a development, and there were like 3 or 4 models that owners could choose from, and they were developed in that grid pattern and pick different models. And now once I knew, I didn't realize that previously, but actually driving through the neighborhood now, you start to notice that, and that there's like 4 different houses, and you can look at it and say, oh, wow, they changed these features on that original model. And that's happened over time. And this is really a continuation of that same grid, right? You're going to have houses on Walnut, which, are in keeping with the houses toward the bottom of the page. And again, Beech Tree continues up into a cul-de-sac. There are other cul-de-sacs off of that North Wayne neighborhood that, it's very keeping with it. We're going to have sidewalks, provide pedestrian connectivity. So I think it's really a continuation of that neighborhood.
And is it your opinion that really the character of this area is residential in nature?
Yes, I'd say
And that
anything south of Eagle Road and west of, I believe it's Paul Road, is really residential. When you get north, then you get into, it almost is the tree line that we're preserving is really like a separation between, Valley Forge Military, which obviously is very institutional, and you have St. David's Golf Club and Cabrini on that north side, and this neighborhood. And so like preserving that tree line at the top of the hill is a component of this project.
I'm sorry, there was feedback. I couldn't hear you there.
Where did you lose me?
So like preserving that tree line at the top of the hill.
Oh, preserving the tree line was an important component of the project. And I believe it's important to the community in the neighborhood because it adds that buffer area or a kind of a demarcation between the residential neighborhood and the institutional uses.
And Rob, when we talk about this development and the proposed project, looking first at kind of what this applicant is proposing, would you say that the relief we're seeking tonight is the minimum necessary for our proposed project?
Yes.
And then any realistic residential redevelopment of this project? I mean, we're not talking about losing a unit or two. If there was no disturbance of slopes, is it your opinion it has a catastrophic impact on kind of thoughtful residential redevelopment of this site?
I believe it has a catastrophic impact on the thoughtful redevelopment. Could you squeeze things in I hate to use the term, but irrational manner? Yes, you could probably squeeze a bunch of properties in a kind of an irrational manner and avoid a band of slopes, but then be able to put your driveway over it because it was the only piece that was, that it was the only location feasible and you could play games with it. But it really wouldn't be a comprehensive, well thought out, well planned project.
And even in your description there would be disturbance of slopes, but it would be for driveways and so forth where you could potentially shoehorn them in to the code. Is that correct?
Correct.
So at this point, I think I'm happy to rest with Mr. Lambert, open him up to Mr. Mahoney and to the board.
Would you like me to proceed?
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Mr. Mahoney, please proceed.
Mr. Lambert, you indicated that you came to your conclusion regarding regarding how these steep slopes were originally developed by inspecting the site, looking at USGS maps, and looking at aerial photographs, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So do I take it, sir, that you didn't have any particular plans, set of plans from Valley Forge or Eastern University, which would demonstrate with certainty when these steep slopes were created?
Yes, that was our testimony.
Now, taking a look at the drawing A3, which is still up on the screen, am I correct, sir, that the salmon-colored areas are the areas of steep slope that are being impacted during the development, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And just so the board understands, there are two parcels here. The larger parcel where the parking lot is located is zoned planned institutional, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And the one at the top, which has a single piece of salmon colored material above the stream, that's R2?
R1.
Is it R1? I'm sorry, it's R1, correct?
I believe so, yes.
All right. Now, going back to the salmon colored areas in the entire development site, how many acres would you say are encompassed by the salmon colored areas?
Approximately an acre.
That's about 5% of the overall site, correct?
Approximately, yes.
And can you tell me, sir, when you compare the proposed development against the salmon colored areas, how many of the lots of the 20 lots encompassed in the project are affected by the steep slopes?
I'm gonna have to take a guess, but I would guess 6. But it doesn't.
So 6 of the
But I want
six
to
of the lots-
I'd like to clarify. In the current configuration, 6 would be, you know, there's a band of slopes, and I'm using Exhibit A4 now. So the band of slopes starts at Radnor Street Road and really goes up vertically up the page, right? So when I include those 6, I think that there's actually some of the lots that it's really not the house or the structure that's sitting on those slopes. It's really the cul-de-sac bulb and the proposed road and driveways that are actually on where that slope would physically be located.
The driveways are going to be constructed here, correct?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Driveways are going to be constructed as part of this project, correct?
Correct.
And the extension of East Beach Tree Lane is going to be constructed as part of this project, correct?
Correct.
Would you say that the majority of the length of the East Beach Tree Lane extension is affected by these steep slopes?
No.
How much of East Beach Tree Lane extension is affected by the slopes? Lengthwise?
Lengthwise, I would say that if again, I'm going to use Exhibit A4. If you look at Beech Tree Road, it goes past the first 2 houses before it has a slight right bend before the cul-de-sac bulb. And going back to A3, if you look at Beech Tree Road at the bottom of the page, if you go back, it's really at the end by the cul-de-sac bulb is where, you know, once it starts to bend. So it's really just the end of the property or end of the beech tree that would be impacted.
So the central part of the extension, which is the cul-de-sac, is impacted by the steep slopes, correct?
Correct. That's over an area that currently has steep slopes.
All right, so you got a portion of East Beech Tree Lane extension affected by the steep slopes, and you've got 30% of the lots of the overall project affected by the steep slopes, correct?
No, but you didn't understand my clarification, right? And so when I refer to the 6 lots, we mentioned that the house. So again, I'm going to go back and forth. So you have Radnor Street Road, you have the house, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, the numbered houses. And if you start looking at the houses in relationship to Radnor Street Road, you have the steep slopes that really go between House 7 and Beech Tree, as I'm going to presume, right? Let's go back and forth a little bit. And so we have A3. And so the first house sits, just off of those slopes. However, the driveway is going to cross the slopes. I believe the ordinance allows driveways to cross slopes where no other location is feasible. So I think there'd be a technical argument that that would be permitted. And that pattern really continues up, I think 8, 9, 10, were included in my numbers of potential properties, but I actually think that they sit in the middle of the parking lot, which doesn't have the steep slopes. When you get around, it's probably 12 and 13. Again, we're going to go back and forth here. 12 and 13, I believe, come back into this area of where the existing houses are. Again, going back to A4, if you look at the area where Walnut is between lots 2 and 10, going back to A3, the band of steep slopes that exist there is approximately in between those two, probably gets close to lot 10, but is in between those two houses. Lot 1 up there in the corner impacts the two bands of slopes around the house up in that corner.
So let's conclude by telling me the exact number of lots that are affected by the steep slopes.
When you say affected by the steep slopes, please define what you mean by affected.
What I'm asking you, sir, is whether or not the 6 lots that you identified before are affected in some way, shape, or form on the lot itself, whether it's the house, the driveway, the curbing, whatever. How many of them are affected by the steep slopes? Give me a number.
I'm trying to understand I'm trying to contemplate what you mean by affected. Do you mean that if I took a overlay that the salmon color would occur within the bounds of the property? Is that what you mean by affected?
That's exactly what I mean. What's the number?
I'd have to calculate it. I think that the salmon color could be on a lot. We might be proposing to regrade it to have it make logical sense. But those salmon areas may not be in an area where we have an improvement. And so if you wanted to be ridiculous, we could build 2 walls on either side of it and not touch that slope.
Sir, the question is very simple. How many of the lots, no matter what portion of the lot is affected, how many are affected by the steep slope, period?
Well, if I wanted to say where a salmon color would be superimposed on this, let's go back to the A4, and we talked about having that line go straight up, right? So we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That one's probably okay. I think 8, 9, 10. There's probably, 10, 11, 12 lots have some salmon color on them. But I
So
don't
11
know
lots
where
are potentially going to be affected by the steep slopes, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
So 11 lots of the proposed project are going to be affected by the steep slopes, correct?
I've approximated it based on what you've heard tonight. Maybe
So
it might even be what we just said. You said 11, right? I believe I said up to 12, but if you really wanted to consider little pieces, you might even be 13 or 14.
Thank you. Now, you're familiar with the steep slopes ordinance, correct?
Yes.
And subparagraph 280-112A3 says that one of the intents is to prevent an increase in the possibilities of landslides and soil subsidence. Correct?
Correct. I pulled up
What is
the
soil
code up
subsidence,
on the
sir?
screen for you.
What is soil subsidence?
Like a sinkhole.
And how does that occur?
Areas getting, undermined. Sometimes it's the geology that would create that soil subsidence.
In order to even out the parking lot area, is it the intent of the developer to put fill on that parking lot or the area of the parking lot?
There will be fill areas, yes.
Would that not cause the possibility of an increase in soil subsidence by putting the fill on the entire parking lot?
Not necessarily. It's all going to be constructed in a controlled manner. The township has inspectors. All the work is inspected and observed, and they're going to push out the dirt, roll it, compact it, and build.
But it could, because you're disturbing the soil and putting new soil on top of it, right?
Not when it's done properly.
Does the possibility exist, sir, that because of the construction method you're going to use, that soil subsidence could occur in the parking lot area?
Mr.
Yes or
Mahoney,
no?
I'm going to object. So, Mr. Riley, that's been asked and answered twice now.
I don't think he's answered my question.
I'd like to have a ruling on the objection, Mr. Mahoney, please.
I'm going to allow the question. Please answer.
When constructed properly, there will not be any soil subsidence.
If not constructed properly, there could be soil subsidence, correct?
Anything could happen if you don't do it properly.
Well, one of the intents of the steep slopes ordinance is to keep developers off of steep slopes so that you avoid landslides and soil subsidence, correct?
That is what the ordinance says. Yes, A3.
Thank you. Sir, you indicated that there's no unnecessary hardship here. Is that right? Or did you say there was one?
I testify that there's a hardship that was not caused by the applicant.
And who was it caused by? The predecessor entitled the applicant?
The hardship is a physical feature of the land as created by predecessors.
And that would be Valley Forge Military Academy in all likelihood, correct?
Correct.
They are the predecessor in title to your client, assuming they go through the settlement, right?
That's not correct. The owner of the property is Eastern University.
Presently.
That's correct. They're the predecessor in title
And
to our client.
Mr. Lambert, is it true that Valley Forge sold the property to Eastern University?
That is what I've heard. I have no knowledge of the transaction.
Is it your understanding, sir, that Valley Forge Military Academy installed the parking lot?
I don't know who installed it, but I know that it was installed in, I believe it was between 1955 and 1965, somewhere in that vicinity. And I believe Valley Forge owned the property at that time.
So if they owned the property at that time, likely they were the ones who installed the parking lot, right?
I don't know. I know that they own the property and I know that it was constructed at around that time. I don't know who implemented installing it.
Sir, when you were engaged by the developer to perform your work on the property, were you aware at the time of your first site visit that there were steep slopes that were going to impact the development?
We were aware that there were slopes and we were discussing them with the township staff.
So you knew, strike that, did you advise your client before they signed the agreement of sale that the steep slope ordinance was going to come into play?
I don't know what point my client signed the agreement of sale.
Did you at some point in time advise your client that steep slopes are going to come into play because of what you saw?
Objection. I don't see relevance to what Mr. Lambert advises his client on. And this is beyond the scope.
It's important to know when he found out that there were steep slopes there, because that information was transferred at some point in time to your client. That's the
I
relevance.
object, Mr. Mahoney. I don't see the relevance in it, and I don't think that Mr. Lambert's conversations with his client, which are outside of his expert testimony this evening, bear witness to whether or not there's a foundation for a variance.
Well, there's case law out there which talks about self-imposed hardship occurring when a predecessor in title does something to the property which causes topographical condition complained of.
Mr. Mahoney, we are on the record. My client's witness, Mr. Lambert, has testified that this applicant did not create these conditions on the site. And that's his testimony. What he's discussed with his client about when he identified the slopes is not relevant to this hearing.
I think
I'm
it's
gonna-
most certainly relevant.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm gonna allow Mr. Falcone's objection at this point. Mr. Mahoney, if you could move on to another topic if you have one.
Certainly. Sir, could you look at A4 again, please? Could you, for the benefit of the zoning hearing board, identify by lot numbers those particular lots that are going to be affected by the steep slope ordinance in any way, shape, or form?
I believe we just went through that. I could guess. And that's.
No,
where
you
we
didn't identify that by lot number. You identified the total number, but I'm not sure by the lot number. So if you do that, please, I'd appreciate it.
So using Exhibit A4.
Hold on, Rob. I'm going to object again, Mr. Riley. Mr. Lambert testified. He is not specific. Mr. Mahoney pressed him to make a best guess, which he did. He's now asking Mr. Lambert to go back exactly contrary to what Mr. Lambert said he was capable of doing at this point and go through this exercise again. I feel like we've been here.
Mr. Mahoney, where are you going with the specific identification of the lot numbers?
What I'm trying to establish is the percentage of lots that will be subject to the steep slopes.
Okay, I think on the basis of the testimony that we've already heard, there's sufficient evidence in the record that one could do that mathematical calculation based on the prior testimony of the witness. So I'm going to allow Mr. Falcone's objection.
Very good, thank you. So the questions I have. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members of the board, please.
Mr. Riley.
I'm sorry. Oh,
I'm
that
sorry,
Mr.
John
Lord?
Lord, I'm sorry. I have a question for Mr. Falcone.
Yes, sir.
Are we here just on the slopes issue, or are we also here on the rezoning?
No, we are just here for the slopes, John. The rezoning, should we receive relief tonight, will occur before the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
And if we could take down the exhibit so Norma can see who's talking. Questions again for Mr. Lambert from the members of the board.
John Nagel, isn't it true that whoever develops this property is going to have to implement stormwater management and slope controls?
Assuming they would develop the property, yes. If somebody developing this property is going to have to do stormwater, and more than likely will disturb these slopes.
So therefore, the argument that you're going to make things better really isn't relevant. It was any development would make things better.
But any development is going to disturb the slopes.
Well, you don't know that. Also, you're asking for blanket variance on all steep slopes. And I was very surprised that you didn't have an exhibit that overlaid the steep slope map on the lot out, because that really is critical to the discussion. And that's all I have.
Okay, questions from other, thank you, John. Questions from other board members? Rich, Jamie, no? Okay, I have a couple of questions. Part of it, frankly, is something that flows from the question that Mr. Nagel just asked. And it relates to the fact that we are being asked, frankly, to provide a blanket variance for the entirety of the property. And typically, we consider requests of that sort with, you know, some specific reference to plans as they will be developed. I understand that the position that the developer is in with respect to not wanting to get the entire machinery of the sourdough process commenced without knowing the extent to which the existence of these slopes is going to get in the way of their development. But I think that there's a fundamental question here, which is, you know, we tend to grant relief in instances where we do grant relief to the minimum extent necessary to overcome the unnecessary hardship that the property owner is facing. We've been asked, I think, to consider well, I mean, it's not even frankly admitted into evidence here, but there's a plan that has been passed by us, which shows a fairly robust development of the property. Is it the applicant's position that we should be granting a variance in bulk based on whatever comes out the other end of the sourdough process? That's my first question.
Yeah, and I think they're good questions. I think Mr. Nagel raises a good question as to you, John, and we are certainly happy to return with an appropriate exhibit with an overlay and to identify the exact areas that will be disturbed. The reality is, we believe we're going to disturb the entirety of certainly the pink areas coming through the site, and Mr. Lambert can identify those. But if an overlay can help color that for the board, we are happy to return with that exhibit for the board and to supplement the record. And we can certainly do that next month if it's relevant to the board. I think it's a good question, right? You guys are tasked with only granting variances to the extent that you deem them necessary. And, you know, in order to show that, we've got to show how this development, or any development to that matter, impacts those slopes, those salmon colored slopes.
Okay, let's hold that one in suspension. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just.
Mr. Mahoney, I think you may have dropped off into mute land.
Am I back?
You are back. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to interject something with regard to the argument. If I wasn't.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mahoney, you'll have an opportunity to argue in just a few minutes, I suspect. And I know if my. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll wait.
Okay. And if I could make my questions less long-winded, you'll have the opportunity sooner rather than later. Apologize. Okay, so let's hold in abeyance the notion of supplemental evidence that would help the board get a better feel for things. In the course of developing plans, what consideration was given to going forward or going public, or whatever the right term might be, with the plan that was provided this evening, as opposed to plans that would be more compliant, i.e. less disruptive of the steep slopes? What sort of consideration to, you know, let's say a 15 property plan, or a 12 property plan, or a 17 property plan, something other than a 20 property development? You know, what consideration was given to that, and specifically what consideration was given to working around the steep slopes?
Rob, that's to you.
So, knowing that those slopes were just clearly made along the parking lot and bisected, the development of the site was really balanced, looking at, the trees, the stream corridor, and really a continuation of the neighborhood grid, and the band of steep slopes, and I'm looking at A3 as I'm looking off to the side there, really just bisects the property and wouldn't make a development like that possible. You really start to get, where we have limited driveways kind of on the surrounding streets and Eagle Road, as you end up forcing driveways out onto Eagle Road. You have driveways coming out onto Radnor Street Road, and you are eliminating a lot of the large tree canopy as offset by trying to preserve slopes. And so balancing all these pieces, we have preserved the slopes along the stream corridor, and balancing those pieces is really figuring out what made the most sense to the most parties.
So is the board, is the position the applicant's taking with respect to the discussion we're having here, that the only way the property owner or the property owner can enjoy the use of its property is by building 20 houses? Because it seems perhaps that either that number is causing the orientation of the property to be such that it's disturbing the steep slopes. Do you feel you have the ability to enjoy the use and development of your property, or the property, if 17 houses are built or 16 houses are built? Because, again, this board has limitations on what it can do. And we're charged with granting the minimum relief necessary to alleviate the unnecessary hardship. And at some point, and given that this is a use variance as opposed to a dimensional variance, the consideration that the property owner may not get full economic benefit of their property is a less compelling argument at this point. So again, would putting driveways other than through the cul-de-sac be a workable solution that could provide the policy, that's my day job, provide the property owner with adequate enjoyment of its property and development of its asset, yet still comply in a more perhaps the more thoughtful way with the requirements of the zoning code?
And I think, John, that gets back to the initial question from John Nagel and your question, which is, if we come back with a plan that shows how we believe the primary area of our concern is the area of slopes through the middle of the site. We believe we can develop this property, and whether it's with a few less lots or not, we think we can develop it without disturbing any of the other areas. The areas through the middle, we believe are critical to any real development of the property that's going to eliminate that parking lot, which is a massive unmitigated area of impervious coverage, as well as to create a single access point for the bulk of the homes. So when we talk about limiting it, can you get by with 14 houses or 15 houses? We think even at that number, you need relief of that single strip of slopes through the middle of the site. We think beyond that, you can develop the site and avoid the slopes. And that is ultimately the plan here. We do not believe the site can be developed really for any reasonable purpose without eliminating that parking lot, properly mitigating the stormwater, and restoring that area to a more natural condition. And so that is the area of primary concern. Does that band of slopes allow for even the development that you're talking about? And in our belief, and Rob's testimony, is it does not, because it pushes the development too far out, and you no longer have, you begin to drift into other areas of potential relief from the township. You're going to be disturbing other areas of the property that are wooded. You're going to be taking access onto roads where that's not what the ordinance is looking for. So when we look at the site, when we look at the map that we had up, I think, which was the slope map, I think it was A3, we are prepared, and our goal is going to be, and should the board say you can disturb those slopes to the middle, but no other slopes, that is the goal of this application. And that's where we are intending to go with it. And we understand, and as I had mentioned, we understand that the number of lots on this site is also still a matter that has to be fleshed out with the Board of Commissioners and with the neighbors. We know that there is concern there on density, but we think that residential development with that parking lot in the middle of the property and the slopes created thereby, it just can't happen. And frankly, we believe that even PI development with that parking lot doesn't work. We think the parking lot has to come out, the area has to be restored to a more natural condition, and then you have to start from that natural condition, appropriately mitigate stormwater, and then go forward. And we think that's what the ordinance is trying to accomplish. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. So if the board said to us, you can only disturb that strip through the middle, that's really where we're looking as far as a proper delineation of the relief that we're seeking.
Thank you for that, Mr. Falcone. Are there any other board questions at this time?
I guess I
Okay.
have one question is based on this dialogue, does the applicant want to come back with an overlay?
Mr. Lord, we're going to get to that. We're still holding that in abeyance. We have a number of folks that may wish to participate in public comment. So I want to make sure that at least we've closed out the questions for this witness. We will revisit that point in just a moment, but if there's no objection at this time, I would close out the board questioning for this witness. And
this witness one question.
Sure.
All right, hopefully it's a quick one. Mr. Lambert, the exhibit that's labeled steep slope exhibit, the salmon colored areas, those would be the only areas of slope that you intend to remove, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So everything that's salmon colored, those are the slopes that are going to be removed if you've got approval for that.
Correct.
Okay.
The other two colors would remain.
They may be disturbed as opposed to necessarily removed in their entirety, right?
Yeah, at a minimum, they're going to be disturbed and perhaps removed, correct, Lambert?
Okay.
The salmon color, yes.
Okay. Hold on for a potential return to the offer of an overlay. But if there are members of the public who wish to participate in public comment, raise your hand and we will get that process going.
I have Richard Rank for public comment.
Okay, good evening. Norma, if you would swear in Mr. Rank.
Are we going to get his picture or not?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
There is no, I'm having the same trouble Hank had putting my picture up. Normally there'd be an icon to open the video, but there doesn't seem to be one. I've been fiddling around with Zoom and Facebook and coming up with, YouTube and coming up with none. So I'm afraid you're stuck with my voice.
Any objection from Mr. Falcone or Mr. Mahoney on that?
No objection.
None for me. I don't know the voice of Mr. Rank like I do Mr. Mahoney, but I'll take your word for it, I guess.
I know,
Okay,
Mr. Rank, that's,
You want to swear?
Okay,
in?
Norma, if you would.
Yes. Mr. Rank, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I so swear.
Thank you. State your full name and spell your last name, please.
Richard Scott Rank. Rank is spelled R-A-N-C-K.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Rank. Where do you reside, sir?
210 Walnut Avenue. From my house, if I step out onto Walnut, I have a clear view of a substantial portion of the property.
Okay, great. What would you like to share with the board this evening?
Well, I just have a couple of questions and a couple of things I'd like to share. Just to one comment, you had sort of vaguely mentioned about the financials and how that may or may not affect the property. Mr. Mahoney and I had met with Mr. Toohey, who told us without specifics that they require 20 homes to make their nut, or if you will, make their profit. I just throw that in. Now, Mr. Lambert had mentioned that there was no stormwater management whatsoever. I would certainly agree that it's at a minimum, but at the bottom of the parking lot, there's both a brick wall and in the middle of it, there's a culvert leading to the stream, which begs several questions for me. First of all, in looking at the site, Mr. Lambert, I'm wondering if you took into account sewer runoff from each of those 14 houses and where that water went?
Are you referring to storm or sanitary?
Either.
So
The
sanitary,
reason I bring that, let me intersect, I'm sorry. Our houses on Walnut either have sump pumps or French drains because we sit on top of a water table. And judging from the slopes there, I would not be surprised if those houses equally put in sump pumps and ran them into their sewer lines, which may not be approved, but is often a solution. Has anybody inspected that?
I did not go inside the dwellings.
Okay, I bring that up because when the houses are cleared, the piping and so forth that exists with the houses, will they be removed? The sewer lines?
Yes, there's a sewer main that actually runs through the property that we're proposing to relocate as the redevelopment. Individual, when the house gets removed, everything else gets removed. To hit your comment about the high groundwater, we have done permeability tests and that's informed our stormwater management design. And so we did not run into any limiting zones for the basins.
Okay, back to the stormwater planning you're doing, the lowered area, what's the proper word where the water would go? The not ditch, but the place where water would be first stored and then distributed?
Into stormwater basins?
Yes, thank you, basin. As water accumulates in those basins, where will that water go?
There's a mix of it that, part of it's going to infiltrate into the ground as an infiltration component, and the other is overflow. And we have various discharges on the east side of the property for those systems.
Into what area? Discharge to what?
Over toward where the creek is.
So into the creek?
Yes.
I bring that up because I'm sure many of the board will remember the middle school problem several years ago during horrific rainstorms, the flooding that occurred there. So, and that creek, as it is without additional water runoff, seems to me that it would be easily a cause for flooding.
So that is you've hit one of the cruxes of our argument or our discussion is we right now, all of the water on this site is really unmitigated. It doesn't go into stormwater basins. It just runs directly to that same creek.
True.
Right, in an uncontrolled manner. Once we put in the stormwater systems, we're going to control that runoff and reduce the rates and volume of runoff leaving the site that does today. So it's actually going to help downstream by doing this redevelopment.
Well, certainly as proposed and hoped, without huge storms. I mean, weather being what weather is, or it's kind of unpredictable. But the fact that it's all eventually going to the stream is a concern of mine.
It goes there today, sir.
Site, I understand that, but when you talk about all the water running off, I've walked around the property twice, once with Mr. Mahoney and once with Mr. George Nagel. It's worth noting that and I encourage all of you, if you haven't walked the property, you should, particularly the upper reaches.
Mr. Rank, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to get back to the point here and
Okay, fair enough.
complete your public comment. Thank you.
I don't want to wander. So will site management continue through the development of the property? Will you be responsible as things progress? Or are you recommending what future people do?
So we do this. I'm not sure I understand the question or pertinent to this evening, but we are the civil engineer related to the project. We're preparing all the site designs and permitting. And then, I presume we will be doing some construction observation when it goes under construction.
Okay, but the construction would be in the hands of the next person down the lane, not site engineering.
We don't do, we do design, sir. We don't do, we don't do construction.
I understand and I appreciate that. We live here. And so long after we're gone, we're still here. So that's why I asked that question.
Right. And the township, just so you know, just to be clear, is, we have plans. They get approved by both the township and the county. We will both get township runoff permits and the county NPDS permits. And then once all those permits are approved, there are inspections from both the township and the county for the stormwater systems. There's agreements that go in place. There's all sorts of measures which ensure that the systems are built in accordance with the plan and also maintained over the long term.
Okay, that's great. By the way, I was on the design review board for 8 years, so I'm familiar with how the township works and inspections and so forth. But long and the short is those basins and so forth are turned over to the construction of the people who come along after you, and whatever designs and permits you promised are not necessarily affected in the future. Other things can happen, like when you take your car and they say,
Mr. Rank, again, we're getting off topic here.
I'm sorry.
Is there any, or do you have any other public comment to add for this evening?
I have one last comment, which is walking around the site. I found that the drawings were a little bit disingenuous in terms of describing the property, which is why I was so anxious to have both Mr. Mahoney and Mr. Nagel accompany me another time. And when I say disingenuous, I don't mean they were lies. I just mean when you look at a piece of paper with contour lines on it, it's not the same experience. There are 2 areas which are dumps at the top. I'm curious to know what's in there that's going to be taken out. And that's the end of my comment. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, sir. Are there other members of the public who wish to comment?
This is Colby Grimm of Grimbean and Thatcher. We're the solicitor for the Board of Commissioners. Unfortunately, I should have intervened in the beginning of it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was placed on the record that we had submitted a letter from John Rice to John Riley on behalf of the BOC, that they are in support of the application and we have no objection to any potential relief. And I just wanted to make sure that that letter was not only submitted, but admitted into as an exhibit.
I'm downtown and a fire engine just went by. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Grimm, for making note of that letter. I was going to make reference to a number of items that we received in passing from folks that may not have been with us this evening, but had views on the matter, and was going to reference that. But I will acknowledge that we have received that letter from your partner, and that certainly will be admitted into the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry to jump the gun. I just didn't.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Ian, are there any other folks? I see Mr. Larkin with a hand. Hello, Mr. Larkin. Commissioner Larkin.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Same to you.
But are there other folks wishing to comment? And then if not, Mr. Larkin, jump on in.
Yeah, we have 2 other people, their hand raised
Okay.
for public comment. First is Barbara Kraus Blackney.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Ms. Kraus-Blackney, good evening. You want to try video? Because I know Commissioner Larkin figured the video out. But is there a way that you could activate the video?
You know,
Well,
I
you are-
use Zoom all the time for my work, and you're using Zoom webinar. So someone on your end has to give permission to access the video when you're using Zoom webinar. If it's a Zoom meeting, that's different.
I can promote her to a panelist. It'll take 1 second. She'll have to sign in and sign off. Then she'll be able to use the video.
I'm happy not to be on. I've spoken at many meetings related to this
Are there
project.
Are there any objections from either Mr. Mahoney or Mr. Falcone?
No objection.
No objection.
Thank you.
Okay, Norma, if you would please swear in Ms. Kraus-Blackney.
Yes, ma'am, you do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. State your name and spell your last hyphenated name for me.
Sure, it's Barbara Kraus-Blackney, so it's hyphenated. Kraus as in Sam, hyphen Blackney, Blackney.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to commend the board, the zoning board, on the thoughtful questions and careful questions that you are asking, and just encourage your careful consideration of a blanket variance for this site, because if we put this in a larger context, I know that you know that there are many more potential projects coming down the pike with the many nearby planned institutional properties that were referenced earlier in tonight's discussion. So I do think we all, both in North Wayne, but the entire township, you know, need to be mindful of precedents we might be setting, and think just be very careful as we go forward. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ian, next commenter.
Yeah, next comment is Bill Marino.
Okay.
Can
Okay,
you
I
hear
think
me?
we know the answer to the video question. Mr. Marino, good evening. Norma, if you could please swear Mr. Marino.
Yes, you promise or swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. And state your full name, spell your last.
William Marino, Marino.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Marino, I'm sorry, where do you reside in relation to the subject property?
So I am at 2 Paul Road, which I think makes me the largest abutter. So I am along the creek, and I think I have a pretty significant interest in making sure that this is done correctly. So my comments are, I don't know how helpful I can be to you on the narrow issue of the steep slopes. That seems like a legal issue as much as anything, and you guys have a bunch of facts in front of you. But what I can tell you is, while I know that there's a lot of, or some additional continued work to be done with the neighborhood, most of the neighbors support this project, and they support it as a holistic development. From the standpoint of having it done in a relatively compressed time frame so that the construction is contained, as well as, more importantly, I think, what the final product looks like, which is something that is thoughtful and fits within the character of the neighborhood. And so I have found the Concordia group to be extraordinarily responsive and transparent, and highly support this project. You know, for us, it's going to be a bunch of noise, and it's going to be a bunch of dust, and it's going to be 3 years. But I look at the final product and I say, you're going to have an extension of what is something we all think is a beautiful neighborhood, right? We have the North Wayne neighborhood that they are extending down towards my property. When you add on top of that the existing lack of connectivity in sidewalks, you know, as a general matter, I can see how this happens over the course of time. Technology develops, and we now have many more people cutting through. these roads than had it at one point previously. Someone's going to get killed on that road. And so when you guys start talking about switching the houses around and switching the development around, one of the biggest attractions to me is creating the sidewalk accessibility along Walnut Street. It's actually so attractive to me that, assuming I can work out the conditions, I've offered to grant an easement so that they could put sidewalks on my property so that you could connect all of downtown Wayne to Fenimore Woods, which is undergoing a large capital improvement. And so when you start messing with the configuration of how these houses are set up, you start impacting the entire thesis of how that gets laid out. So those are the concerns that I have. I also want to say, I think Barbara's point about the other institutions is a good one. And I think this, you're starting to see institutions fail, right? You're starting to see lots of land carved off and sold. I know that there are more coming down the pike. If this does not become residential, if I'm Eastern, this deal blows up, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to find the highest bidder that's going to sell it as planned institutional. And so as a neighbor, I think putting in a properly designed, thoughtful residential development as a buffer to planned institutional, which would be, just a little fingertip into the North Wayne neighborhood. I've been in favor of this from the get-go because strategically it creates a buffer between my property and planned institutional. When I moved here, I looked at that parking lot and went, this is an absolutely beautiful area, except for one thing, right? And now they're here and they're offering to fix this thing and they're offering to make it more like the other things that we all think is beautiful. And I hear a bunch of resistance from it and I don't understand it at all. So my personal sense is it's going to protect the people who live closest to the property, and it's going to be a thoughtful project that creates additional function. But that's all I'd like to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Marino. Ian, is there anyone else in the queue?
That is the last we have from the attendees. I think the next public comment would be from Commissioner Larkin.
Okay, Commissioner Larkin, your patient hand is we're ready to hear from you.
Thank you all. This is perfect timing. I
Did
have
you-
the kids.
Do I need to swear him?
No.
Okay.
This is good timing. I have the kids tonight, so later is better for me. I was asked by the applicant to come on and give a sense of the neighborhood, and I think that Mr. Marino has done an excellent job with that. I want to be careful about saying that there's a majority in favor of this, only because I haven't literally gone door to door and asked every person. I'm sure depending on where you draw the circle on the map, you're going to get a majority or not. What I can tell you is that I have heard very loud resident support for this project, in no small part because the applicant has done a really nice job interfacing with the residents. I want to stress that they have agreed to incorporate into their SALDO plan, their land development application, not just the normal boxes for where the houses are going to go, but the materials that they're going to use to build the houses, the designs for the houses, so that the township can then hold their feet to the fire during the building process and make sure that the neighbors get what essentially they bargained for in the pregame process while talking to the developer. They have bent over backwards and they're looking to take a lot which they're hoping to rezone as R2, which is 20 acres, and build 20 houses. When I got started with the project, I think my recollection that it was actually 22 homes they wanted to build, and over time they came down. So they have already compromised on that. I don't work for the developer, so if you guys can get them down from 20, awesome, please do. I'm not complaining about that. But I do want to give some backstory there. I think that more substantively, I'd like to, however, answer John's question, John Nagel's question. John, you had said that there's really no particular benefit here to doing this design because anybody who builds is going to end up putting on stormwater management facilities. The benefit to this particular project is that they are decreasing the impervious cover while putting on the required stormwater management. And it's also true, as Dave mentioned, that they're going to go over and above, which of course the future applicant might not. We know that there are other applicants out there. One of them is before you guys as we speak, looking to put retirement communities on in planned industrial. I have been asked by potential developers of other sites if there are places in the township that they could put similar retirement communities. If this ends up falling through, I think that there's no question in the long term that this will end up being redeveloped as a PI site if it's not rezoned. And it will end up being far more than the 20 houses. We will not end up getting the benefit of the reduced impervious cover coupled with the stormwater management. If you look at the Valley Forge site plan, they're looking at putting in something like 60 homes on a comparably sized lot. That's 3 times as many. Plus, of course, they would have the continuing care facility. So the footprint is significantly larger for those PI sites. And of course, if this doesn't get snapped up for that, it will end up eventually being snapped up for something. Maybe Villanova will build something, I don't know. But the point is, this is a plan with a very small footprint comparatively, increases the number of homes on the lot minimally. And that's the reason why, at least I on the board, asked our solicitor to come and support this. I'm sure that other commissioners have their own reasons, but fundamentally, I wanted to say this is a plan that I support based on the feedback that I've heard from the residents. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Larkin. Is there any other public comment? Mr. Nagel, Mr. George Nagel?
Yes, I'll speak. I don't know if I have to be sworn in.
I don't think so.
Not a trustworthy face, but please proceed. We will take our chance.
Okay. I don't have a lot to add other than, you know, the resistance that I've heard in the neighborhood, and there is significant resistance.
I'm sorry, George. Let me interrupt you for a second. I apologize. Yeah. Where do you live in reference to the subject property?
A very, very long field goal away.
Okay, thank you very much.
About half block up Beech Tree.
Okay, just want to make sure we've established that for the record. Thank you.
Right. I think the general concern is, and it's not necessarily a zoning issue, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I know it's not relevant to this discussion, but other people have been discussing the overall plan, so I think it's appropriate. The R2 zoning that I understand that they've applied for, the concern is whether it's this developer or a successor or a purchaser in bankruptcy, if they have an R2 ruling in their pocket, I understand they can build 35 houses. That's a real concern. So I think, again, the bulk of the resistance has been on the zoning classification and the desire to get it classified as R1, which is consistent, as I understand it, historically with what that property was zoned.
And I would agree with you that that's a consideration that's outside.
That's right.
I mean, we have to think of the controversy here, or the application here, in terms of there's going to be some development. Now, under what zoning classification it might be is a question for folks elsewhere.
That's right. That's right. On the steep slopes, I think the you know, the issue is there a hardship? And you know, if you wanted to look at situations where you give a hardship variance, you typically do not give a variance if it causes a negative impact on a neighboring community. I think the folks who live on Beech Tree are the most affected, and obviously the people right across the street on Radnor Street Road. But the Beech Tree entrance is the main entrance to this development. And as I count it, there's 13 of the 20 houses will be accessed directly from Beech Tree. Now, Beech Tree is a long, straight street, a lot of joggers, a lot of bike riders, people walking their dogs, little kids on bikes, little kids playing games in the street. And I think, you know, this development, not necessarily the zoning ruling, but this development as planned would have a negative impact on that neighborhood. So that's all I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you, George. There being no other, Ian, just double check me, there's no other folks in the queue for public comment?
That's correct.
Okay. We've heard just a short while ago that the applicant might be disposed to continuing this evening's hearing so that it can provide additional demonstrative evidence, if you will, in terms of some of the issues that we're dealing with this evening that would show an overlay between the proposed plan that is under discussion and the topographical plan showing the steep slopes. It's my sense that the board would benefit from that additional piece of information and discussion that might stem or flow from it. So I would at this point ask both the applicant and Mr. Mahoney whether they would be in a position to permit the continuance of this hearing until the May hearing to permit the applicant time to prepare that overlay, provide it to all parties and to members of the board, and then come back in May to go over that additional piece of evidence, answer questions from the board and other parties, and then the board would proceed to the conclusion of its consideration of the matter. Is there any objection from either party to proceeding in that fashion?
So John, I'll say we do not object to that. We are also willing to accept the condition that we would only disturb the strip of slopes coming through that are on the north side of the parking lot. So, whatever, I guess, so pleases the board, I think that's, again, we believe that to be the most significant impact. Our plan is to design around as many slopes as we can. We do not believe it's possible to design around those. And we would accept certainly a condition that be, or a limitation that the only slopes that we could disturb would be those along the entrance drive, those on the north side of the parking lot. So we would leave it to the board's discretion, but we would offer that as well.
Okay, Mr. Mahoney, any thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are these. I have no objection to what you're proposing, John. I think that you hit the nail on the head when you suggested that the issue regarding what is potentially a waiver of the steep slopes ordinance in favor of this developer, that really isn't a situation that anybody wants or should do, because it really comes down to the number of houses that need to be built. And I think this is a time when the developer can step back, take a deep breath, take into consideration what's been said tonight, and find a less, shall I say, hostile path to approval of their project if they were to reduce the number of houses, because that certainly affects the steep slopes waiver, which is effectively what they're asking for, which is a blanket waiver. So I'm not opposed to what you're proposing.
Again, yeah, just to be clear, I don't think we are seeking a blanket waiver. We have identified, as Mr. Economides identified earlier, we have identified the areas of slopes on the site. Those have been identified and they were submitted as part of our exhibit package on exhibit A3. But we are willing to accept as a condition a specific limitation, and our plan that we would come back with would essentially be those same slopes that you've just seen on exhibit A3, but simply with the homes located around it. And our request at that point would be exactly the same as it is now. We would accept the condition that the only slopes we could disturb would be those on the north side of the parking lot, as shown on exhibit A3.
Okay, without speaking to any of the substance, Mr. Falcone, of that statement, I think it would benefit the board to have that overlay So that, this is one of those instances where a picture may be worth several thousand words. And really, I speaking for myself, I think I would benefit and feel that I was making a more knowledgeable determination of the matter if that piece of evidence was available.
We are happy to
So-
submit it and to come
Okay.
back next month.
So we will continue. Well, before I do that, I'm sorry. I do also want to note that we have received a memorandum from Steve Nursini indicating that the Planning Commission convened on April the 5th of 2021. They reviewed the appeal, and the Planning Commission voted unanimously recommending that the Zoning Hearing Board approve the appeal. So that will also be entered into the record along with the letter from Solicitor Rice that was referenced earlier. With that having been done, we are going to continue this hearing until I believe it's May 20th, Kevin, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It is May 20th.
Until the May 20th meeting. And there being no other business coming before the board, this board will be adjourned until the May meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, your participation, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Well,
Thank you.
everybody, have a good,
Bye-bye.
safe